Let me start by reading this statement from US President Joe Biden from February, 7 months ago now, when 3 American soldiers were killed by a drone attack blamed on Iran-backed militia groups. He told the world, if you harm an American, we will respond. So how will he respond after Israeli soldiers shot dead Asina Agi, a 26-year-old US citizen who came to the West Bank as a peaceful human rights activist, joining a campaign to protect Palestinian farmers who are being violently victimized by an illegal Israeli occupation which is illegally stealing Palestinian land, illegally driving Palestinians from their homes in favor of illegal Israeli settlements. She was shot in the head by Israeli troops, executed, or rather murdered in cold blood. Now, firstly, let's think of her loved ones who, like countless Palestinian families, are mourning the violent butchery of someone they loved at the hands of the Israeli military. Let's remember that she was clearly someone driven by a sense of humanity, by a sense of taking on injustice and oppression. And let me also say this, because anyone knows anything about activists who commit to standing in solidarity with Palestinians will know that this is something she will surely have believed. She will, of course, receive far more attention than many Palestinians, the vast majority, who've been brutally killed. Here I am making a video about her. And I say this not to belittle the horror of what's happened to her, but because this video focuses on exposing a hideous double standard of the US support for Israel's genocide, up to and including standing back while US citizens are murdered by the ally that it arms and supports and facilitates. Now, the US State Department spokesperson Matthew Filler, who has spent the last few months filling the airwaves with propaganda on behalf of the Israeli state ever since this all began, he said, "We are aware of the tragic death of an American citizen, Asina Agi, today in the West Bank. We offer our deepest condolences to her family and loved ones. We are urgently gathering more information about the circumstances of her death, and we will have more to say as we learn more. We have no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens." Well, firstly, no mention of Israeli culpability, let alone any denunciation of the Israeli state for murdering one of the US's own citizens. Miller says we have no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens. Is that so? Let's think back to Rachel Corrie, shall we? She was a 23-year-old activist who was crushed to death by an Israeli bulldozer in the Gaza Strip back in 2003. Now, what did the US administration do for Rachel Corrie and her family? Did the Bush administration pile onto Israel, firstly denouncing its evil, imposing sanctions, taking action? No, it did not. I know that a resolution was introduced in the House of Representatives demanding the US government undertake a full, fair and expeditious investigation into Rachel Corrie's killing, but no action was taken. Now, years later, the US ambassador to Israel said it wasn't a satisfactory Israeli investigation, but that was just empty hand-wringing, a platitude. Nothing more. No action taken. Let's think back now to Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian-American journalist for Al Jazeera who was killed by the Israeli state in May 2023, last year, months before the current horror began. She too was shot in the head by the Israeli army. And do you know what they did? They resorted to their usual playbook. Lie, deflect, muddy the water, wait until everyone's attention moves elsewhere. They claimed initially it was Palestinian militants who did it. Then months later, when attention was indeed elsewhere, they admitted it was likely them, the Israeli state, all along. Now, originally, the US government demanded the criminal prosecution of Shireen Abu Akleh's killers, but quickly abandoned that, presumably when it was clear who had killed her. And they claimed that an Israeli review of their military rules of engagement was sufficient accountability. Yes, well, whatever that review of Israeli military rules of engagement was, it has been a tremendous success. I think we can all agree on that. What of the 17-year-old Palestinian-American, Taufik Ajak, killed by Israeli forces in January? At his funeral, his father asked, how many fathers and mothers have to say goodbye to their children? How many more? Well, the answer to that, I'm afraid, has been thousands upon thousands more since. That is, the parents who survived rather than being killed alongside their children. Now, at the time, his father spoke out about US support for the US military machine, but all the White House could do was say they were seriously concerned. Whoopie-doo-dah. All the US does in these circumstances, when Israel murders its own citizens, is do some sad face, do some hand-wringing, call for an investigation, and then just move on. When Hersh Goldberg Polin, the Israeli-American hostage, was killed by Hamas militants, Joe Biden declared, "Make no mistake, Hamas leaders will pay for these crimes." Well, make no mistake, the US will not pronounce to the world that Israeli leaders will pay for these crimes. These American citizens slaughtered in cold blood by the Israeli state. What we see here is the US does not, in fact, do all it can to stand by its own citizens. If you want a US citizen killed by a key ally engaged in massive war crimes, then the US will seek no meaningful justice, let alone any drastic action. The value of a US life in these contexts is dependent on whether it can be used to justify saber-rattling against official enemies. And Israel knows it can act with impunity. The Israeli soldiers who killed these Americans surely knew they could get away with it. They knew they would face no justice, and they were absolutely right. Note, by the way, some of the news coverage about this latest heinous killing. Listen to this from Sky News.
A 26-year-old American woman has allegedly been shot dead in the West Bank during pro-Palestinian demonstrations against settlement expansion.
What the hell is that? They're not even saying allegedly killed by Israel here, when even the likes of the Jerusalem Post, I would know, have been able to declare as a fact that Israeli troops killed her. Here they're saying that her death is alleged. What are they talking about? Do they honestly think it's a matter of debate whether this US citizen was shot in the head and has no signs of life and is now dead? And what of the BBC? Well, they've gone for a classic BBC headline in this horror, attributing no responsibility. American activist shot dead in occupied West Bank. Shot dead by who, BBC? Shot dead by who? Here we have it. Another example of the collusion between our politicians and our media outlets in whitewashing the crimes of the Israeli state. Now, I want to end by talking about another killing. Another killing reported today of someone else. Bana Baker, a 12-year-old Palestinian girl killed during an attack by Israeli settlers on the village of Kirot in Nablus, the West Bank. Little girl, 12 years old. So many children killed. I mean, in Gaza, thousands, but they've killed since the 7th of October, and before 7th of October, hideous numbers of children in the West Bank. Let's remember this little girl. You see, every day, more atrocities, more war crimes, more abominations, armed, facilitated, made possible by the US and its key allies, including Britain, up to and including the US standing by as its own citizens are killed in cold blood by its ally. And that tells you itself all you need to know about this current horror. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your thoughts, your comments. Do listen to us on the podcast. Keep the show on the road at patreon.com/4. I'll speak to you in a bit.